In the middle of the lavish birthday celebration for the 8-year-old son of the most powerful mafia boss in New York, Alessandro Moretti, young Ethan had just reached his hand toward the very first slice of birthday cake when the 3-year-old daughter of the housekeeper suddenly rushed forward and knocked the plate off the table, sending it shattering across the floor. The music died. The entire grand hall fell into complete silence. The mafia boss rose to his feet, anger burning clearly and eyes cold as steel, while little Lily only stood trembling, staring down at the broken pieces of cake at her feet. He had no idea that this seemingly mischievous act had just saved his son's life, and had also opened the door that would lead him into a conspiracy already prepared inside the very walls of his own home, by the hand of the one man he trusted most in this world. The pieces of porcelain lay scattered across the polished marble. For a moment, no one in the grand hall moved. Little Lily stood exactly where she had struck the plate, her small chest rising and falling in quick, frightened breaths, her eyes fixed on the ruin at her feet. Then Sophia moved. She rushed forward from the far wall, her heels catching against the marble, her white apron catching the light of the chandeliers. She reached her daughter in 3 quick strides, pulled Lily behind the fold of her apron, and dropped to her knees on the floor. "Sir, please forgive her. She is only 3. She does not understand. I will take her out this moment, sir. I beg you." Her voice shook, but not the way a servant's voice shakes before her master. It shook the way a mother's voice shakes when she does not yet know what kind of man is about to decide her daughter's fate. Alessandro did not shout. He looked down at the silver cake knife still resting between his fingers. Without hurry, he set it down on the white linen. The soft click of metal against porcelain traveled across the entire grand hall in the absolute stillness. Every guest heard it. Not one moved. Then, in front of hundreds of the most powerful men and women in New York, men and women who had never in their lives seen this man bend a knee for anything, Alessandro Moretti lowered himself onto one knee. His broad shoulders no longer towered above the child. His face, the face that grown men learned to fear before they were introduced to it, softened into something almost unrecognizable. His voice, when it came, was quiet. It was the voice a father used at the edge of a small bed in a dark room. "Tell me, little one, why did you do that?" Lily looked up at her mother, then back at him. Her tiny hand did not let go of Sophia's apron. Her wide brown eyes held his without blinking. "There was a man before," she whispered. "He stood by the cake. He opened a little box. He put something in it." Alessandro rose slowly to his feet. He turned his head toward the head chef standing frozen at the edge of the room. "Test the cake. Now." The family doctor, a quiet man who was always kept within 5 minutes of Ethan because of the boy's condition, was already moving before the order had finished. He came forward with the small leather case that never left his side, unfastened it on the corner of the long table, and drew out the portable allergen kit. 3 minutes passed. To Alessandro, they passed like 3 hours. The doctor lifted his head. "Positive, sir. The most severe one. Enough to kill a child within minutes." The grand hall fell silent for the second time in the span of 5 minutes. Alessandro looked at his son. He looked at the trembling little girl behind Sophia's apron. He looked at the broken pieces of porcelain still lying on the marble floor. Behind him, someone began to weep. No one moved to hush the sound. The greatest men in that room had seen nothing at all, and the smallest hand in it had reached out and saved everything. 1 month before that birthday, the Moretti estate had known nothing of broken porcelain or trembling children. It had known only the quiet, immovable order of a house built by a man who did not tolerate disorder. The estate stood behind tall marble walls at the edge of the Upper East Side, half hidden behind rows of old plane trees. Cameras watched every gate. Guards walked every hallway at intervals so precise a clock could have been set by their footsteps. Every window on the ground floor was reinforced. Every door on the upper floors carried a second lock only Alessandro himself could open. Nothing entered that house without being seen. Nothing left it without permission. Inside the marble walls lived a man of 39. Alessandro Moretti was the 4th in his bloodline to sit at the head of the family, and by the count of every rival still breathing, he was the strongest. The Morettis owned pieces of 5 boroughs. Their name touched the docks in Brooklyn, the warehouses along the Hudson, the quiet restaurants in Little Italy where senators pretended not to be seen. When Alessandro walked into a room, other men rearranged themselves around him without being asked. When he did not walk into a room, other men still spoke of him in lowered voices. He rarely raised his own. On a Tuesday afternoon that month, he sat in his private study on the 2nd floor of the estate, one hand resting flat on the polished walnut desk, the other holding a phone against his ear. A pier boss in Red Hook was on the other end. explaining a shipment that had been delayed for the third time in a month. Alessandro listened without interrupting. When the man finished, Alessandro spoke 3 sentences. The ship moves tomorrow. If it does not, you find a new pier. If the pier does not have you, you find a new city. He set the phone down. The delay was resolved within 4 hours. All of New York knew a single truth about Alessandro Moretti. One word from him could open any door in the city, and one word could close any door forever. It did not matter whose door. It did not matter what was inside, but behind the marble walls of his own estate, that man was allowed to become something else. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Alessandro closed a folder of accounts that 6 accountants had spent 3 days preparing. He rose from the desk. He walked down the long hallway of the 2nd floor, past the tall windows that looked out over the rose garden, past the framed photograph on the small side table, a woman with dark hair and soft eyes, taken many years ago. The only picture he kept of her outside of the drawer in his private study. He stopped at the door of Ethan's room and knocked twice. His son opened the door in blue pajamas, holding a math test in one hand. I got the highest score, Papa. Alessandro took the paper. He read every line of it, though he had understood the grade the moment he saw his son's face. He nodded once. He kissed the boy on the top of his head. The greatest empires in this world are always guarded by the smallest things, and the smallest things are always the deepest wound waiting to be opened. The math test that hung on the wall of Ethan's room was one of many. The boy who lived inside those walls had grown up quietly, the way children in powerful houses often do, with a seriousness that did not belong to 8-year-olds, but sat comfortably on his small shoulders anyway. Ethan Moretti had his father's dark hair and his mother's soft brown eyes. He read 3 grade levels above his class. He kept his own books arranged on his shelf by author's last name. When adults spoke to him, he answered in complete sentences and looked them in the eye. Most of them left the conversation strangely unsettled, as if a much older person had briefly been visiting inside a boy's body. But Ethan carried something else, something the world outside the marble walls was never told about. He had been born with a food allergy so severe that a single crumb of the wrong ingredient could kill him within minutes. Not sicken him, not weaken him, kill him. Anaphylaxis, the doctors had explained it to Alessandro when Ethan was still an infant, and Alessandro had memorized the list of forbidden substances the same way a schoolchild memorizes the multiplication table. He could recite them backward. The estate's kitchen ran under a protocol tighter than any bank vault. Every ingredient that entered the house was checked 3 separate times by 3 separate people before it reached a pan. Ethan had his own chef, a quiet Milanese woman named Rosa, who had prepared his meals since he was 2 years old. The cold room where the boy's food was prepared was locked between uses, and no unfamiliar person had ever set foot inside it. The family doctor, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Reyes, was required to remain within 5 minutes of Ethan at all times, day or night. He kept a bag by his door. None of this had ever felt strange to Ethan. It was simply how he had always lived. On a Sunday afternoon that month, the boy sat cross-legged on the grass of the rose garden, with a small girl beside him. She was 3 years old, dark curls tied with a red ribbon, and she wore small white sneakers that had come untied. "Ethan," she said, in the way small children mix the words they know. "My shoe." Ethan set down his book, moved to his knees on the grass, and took her foot into his lap. His fingers worked the laces carefully, the way an older brother's fingers work carefully because he does not want to pull too tight. He tied a small, neat bow. He looked up at her. "There, try walking." Lily stood up and took 2 proud steps. She sat back down beside him. He broke a butter cookie in half. He looked at both pieces. He placed the larger one in her small palm. "You take the bigger part. You are smaller." Lily accepted this reasoning with the seriousness of a 3-year-old accepting a gift from a king. She held the cookie in both hands and began to eat it in small, careful bites. Blood does not always make family. Sometimes family is only 2 children who found each other in a garden one afternoon and decided, without ever announcing it, that they belonged to one another. Around the boy in the garden and the man in the study, 3 other people moved through the marble hallways of the Moretti estate. The first was Sophia. She had come to work at the estate almost 6 years ago, a widow with quiet hands and an infant daughter and no other family left in the city. Alessandro had taken her in personally after a recommendation from Rosa, and had done something unusual for a man in his position. He had allowed her child to live inside the walls of the house. Sophia was given the position of head housekeeper. She was given a small, clean apartment in the rear staff wing overlooking a slim strip of garden. She was paid twice what any housekeeper in New York earned. Alessandro never explained why. Sophia never asked. She simply kept the estate spotless, moved through the hallways in soft shoes, and taught her daughter to say sir and madam and to never wander into rooms that were not her business. The second was Vivian. She was 34, an art gallery owner from a respectable Milanese family, and she had entered Alessandro's life 2 years ago at a charity dinner, where they had spoken for 11 minutes, and then not spoken again for 3 months. He had called her on a rainy Tuesday. They had been together ever since. She was clever, calm, and beautiful in the quiet way that did not demand attention. She had understood from the beginning what kind of man she was choosing, and she had never asked him to be something else. What she had worked for, patiently, was the boy. Every Friday evening, Vivian read to Ethan from a chair beside his bed, old adventure novels the boy chose himself. Every Saturday morning, she gave him a drawing lesson at the small easel in the sunroom. The boy had resisted her for the first year. He had watched her the way a small animal watches a stranger who keeps offering food. But somewhere in the last few months, he had begun to save her the chair beside him at breakfast without being asked. The wedding was set for 3 months from now, at the estate itself. The third was Marco. Marco Bellini had stood at Alessandro's right hand for more than 10 years. He had walked into every dark room ahead of Alessandro. He had taken 2 bullets in the chest at the Red Hook docks 6 years earlier, and had spent 3 weeks in a hospital bed refusing morphine because he wanted to be awake if Alessandro visited. Alessandro had visited every day. In the family, Marco was regarded as Alessandro's younger brother. In the estate, Marco held keys to every room, codes to every alarm, and clearance to every wing without exception. Alessandro remembered the 10th anniversary evening still. Marco had knelt on one knee, half laughing, half in tears. Alessandro had placed the custom watch in his hand, a small gold crown crossed with a star burned into the face, only one of its kind in this world, the word brother engraved inside the backplate. Marco had worn it every day since. The symbols we place on the wrists of the men we love are only as true as our patience to keep looking at them. The years teach us to stop looking. The morning of the 8th birthday came bright and cold over the marble walls. By 10 o'clock, Vivian was already in the estate kitchen wearing a white apron over a soft cream blouse. She had asked Alessandro 2 weeks earlier if she might be allowed to make the cake herself. He had looked at her for a long moment before nodding once. She had understood the weight of the permission. She had not thanked him. She had simply gone to work. She stood beside Rosa at the long steel counter, and together the 2 women went through the ingredient list line by line. Vivian read each item aloud. Rosa checked it against the sealed inventory sheet that hung on the wall of the cold room. They did this 3 times. Every jar of flour, every tin of butter, every carton of cream was placed on the counter only after both women had spoken its name aloud and confirmed it. Vivian did not need to be told which ingredients could not enter that kitchen. She had memorized them the same way Alessandro had, years ago, though for a different reason. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the cake was finished. 3 tiers of white cream, smooth and cold and unadorned, waiting for the 8 candles that would be placed on it just before the guests were seated. Vivian lifted it herself onto the silver tray. She carried it into the cold room at the back of the kitchen, set it down at the center of the small marble prep table, and closed the heavy door behind her. She untied her apron. She went upstairs to change. For the next 30 minutes, the cold room was left unwatched. It was in that half hour that Lily wandered into the back of the house looking for her mother. Sophia had been upstairs turning down the beds for the guest wing. Lily had grown bored of waiting in the small staff sitting room, had slipped off her chair, and had walked down the service corridor in her small white shoes, pushing open doors she was not supposed to push open. The kitchen was empty. The pantry was empty. The narrow hallway that ran behind the kitchen was empty too, except for a door left slightly ajar. She walked up to it and looked in through the crack. Inside the cold room stood a tall man in a dark suit. His back was to her. He was leaning slightly over the cake on the marble prep table. In his hand was a small silver box, no larger than a matchbox. She watched him tip something onto the tip of one finger. She watched that finger move quickly across the top layer of white cream, one quiet stroke, no more than 10 seconds, and then withdraw. Lily did not understand what she had seen. She was 3 years old. She did not know that grown men did not usually touch cakes with their fingers, but the sharp white LED of the cold room caught something on his wrist as he lowered his hand. A watch. A small gold shape on the face of it, a little crown crossed with a star. Bright, pretty, unlike anything she had ever seen before. She stood there for a few seconds, then she turned and walked away to find her mother. She told no one. A child's memory keeps what it cannot yet understand whole and untouched, waiting patiently for the day the meaning arrives. The doctor's words still hung in the air of the grand hall. Alessandro allowed himself exactly 2 seconds, then his face closed like a door. He did not shout. He did not order the guests to remain. Instead, he lifted a single glass of champagne from the tray of a passing waiter, tapped it once with the edge of a spoon, and waited for the silence to hold him. "My friends, I owe you an apology. Our chef has just informed me that a batch of the cream tonight has spoiled. It is a small thing, but not a thing I am willing to serve to any guest who has honored my son with their presence tonight." A polite murmur passed through the hall. "You have my gratitude for coming. As small compensation for a shortened evening, my staff will accompany each of you to your cars with a bottle from my private cellar. Please, enjoy it in good health. My son will remember your gifts, and so will I." He smiled. It was the smile a wolf might learn to wear if a wolf had to attend a wedding. The guests, most of whom had already begun to sense that something was wrong but had been too well-mannered to ask, allowed themselves to be shepherded gently toward the doors. The staff moved with the quiet efficiency of men who had rehearsed silence for years. Within half an hour, the grand hall was empty of every face that was not paid to be there. Only the household remained. The kitchen staff, the security team, Marco, Vivian, Sophia, and Lily, held together in a small, trembling knot near the far wall. Ethan had already been carried upstairs. Dr. Reyes had insisted on it before Alessandro could even give the order. The boy had been placed in his own bed, monitored, an IV line prepared on the small table beside him, in case of a delayed reaction from any accidental exposure. The doctor would remain seated in the chair beside that bed all night, and would not sleep. In the private study on the second floor, Alessandro convened the meeting. Marco stood at his left shoulder, as he always did. His voice was low, professional, controlled, the voice of a man who understood how much weight rested on every syllable spoken in a moment like this. Who had access to the cold room during the 30 minutes the cake was unattended? Rosa answered first, her hands folded tightly in front of her apron. The list was assembled aloud. The head chef herself, 3 kitchen assistants, all named, all present, Vivian, who had placed the cake in the room and left it there, and, by clearance code alone, 2 other names, Marco and Alessandro. Both of them had been in different wings of the estate during those 30 minutes, seen by multiple witnesses. The list ended. Marco looked down at the names on the paper in his own hand. Then he lifted his eyes and let them rest, for perhaps 3 seconds, on Alessandro. He did not speak Vivian's name. He did not need to. His eyes did the work. His mouth was too disciplined to do. Some investigations are not investigations. They are ceremonies performed around a conclusion that was already written before the first question was asked. The morning came gray over the marble walls. Vivian did not wait to be asked. At 7:30, she walked down the long corridor to Alessandro's study in a plain black sweater, her hair unbrushed, her face washed clean of the makeup she had worn the night before. She stood in the doorway. "Search my room. Any hour. All of it. I have nothing to hide." Alessandro nodded once. Marco, standing at the far window, allowed the smallest incline of his head. 2 of the household security team went upstairs with Rosa as witness. Vivian sat with them the entire time. She opened every drawer herself. She lifted every folded blouse. She turned out the pockets of every coat in her closet. She showed them where she kept her jewelry, her passport, her old letters. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing seemed suspicious. Then one of the guards knelt at the small vanity by the window. He lifted the top layer of tissues out of the shallow drawer. Underneath, tucked flat against the wood, was a single receipt. He turned it over in gloved hands and read the header. A specialty food supplier, 3 days ago. 2 items purchased. One of them was the exact ingredient that Ethan's body could not survive. Vivian's face lost every trace of color. "I bought that." Her voice came out flat, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere far behind her chest. "I bought it for a dessert I was planning to serve next weekend, for the adult dinner with the consul's family. It has never been anywhere near Ethan's food. It has never been in that kitchen." She looked at Alessandro. He said nothing. By 9 o'clock, the security footage from the kitchen had been reviewed. Vivian had indeed been alone with the cake in the cold room for roughly 20 minutes, but a 17-minute segment from 4:15 to 4:32 in the afternoon was missing. The technical report used the phrase "system fault." Rosa, when questioned again, confirmed under a shaking breath that Vivian had been the last person to touch the top layer of cream. A junior kitchen assistant named Paolo, a boy of 19 with new-looking shoes and eyes that would not lift from the floor, added something no one had asked him about the night before. "I saw the madam change a jar of powder at the last minute. She poured out one jar and used another. I did not want to say anything last night, sir. I was afraid." Vivian broke. "I did not do this," she wept, her hands pressed flat on the surface of the reading room table between them. "Alessandro, look at me. You know me. You know me." Alessandro sat across from her. His hands were folded. He did not raise his voice. He did not answer at all. For 2 full minutes, he only looked at her. The silence in that room was worse than any accusation could have been. It was the silence of a man measuring the distance between everything he had believed 12 hours ago and everything he was being handed now. He wanted to believe her. Every part of him wanted to believe her. But he could not stake the life of his only son on the color of what he wanted. The first evidence is always the easiest to trust. That is precisely what makes it the most dangerous thing in the room. In the days that followed the receipt, Marco did not leave Alessandro's side. He was there when Alessandro walked into the study in the morning, already standing at the window with 2 black coffees prepared. He was there through every phone call. He was there through every silent lunch that Alessandro did not touch. He was there when Alessandro sat in the dark of the second-floor hallway long after midnight, watching the closed door of Ethan's bedroom, the way a man might watch a fire he could not quite trust to stay in its hearth. And every day, Marco brought something new. On the second morning, he set a small printed sheet on the desk. The tech team recovered a deleted message from the madam's phone. It was sent 2 weeks before the party to an unlisted number. It refers to a special dessert for Ethan. The number does not appear anywhere else on her records. Alessandro read the line twice. He did not comment. On the third morning, Marco returned with a witness statement. The manager of the specialty food supplier had been interviewed. The man remembered Vivian clearly. He had personally handed her the 2 items. He had signed the receipt himself. There was no doubt. Every time Marco placed a new page on the walnut desk, he did it with the slow, reluctant hand of a brother who did not want to be the one bringing the news. His eyes carried the weight of a man asked to say something he had spent his whole life hoping he would never have to say. That evening, at a dinner Alessandro could not bring himself to eat, Marco sat down in the chair across from him. He waited. Then, in the low, careful voice a man uses to place a heavy stone in another man's hands, he offered the frame. "Brother, I do not want to be the one to say this, but I have watched too many houses fall from the inside. Think it through with me. If Vivian becomes your wife, and Ethan is still alive, she never controls this family. The boy is the sole heir. For her, he is a wall between her and everything you have built. She is intelligent enough to know that. And people, even good people, do terrible things for money and power. I have seen it too many times in my own lifetime to pretend it does not happen." Alessandro said nothing. He turned the wineglass in front of him without drinking from it. He remembered Marco taking 2 rounds in the chest at Red Hook 6 years ago, and refusing morphine so he could speak to Alessandro when he arrived at the hospital. He remembered Marco lifting Ethan out of the maternity ward on the day the boy came home, cradling the infant against his shoulder as if he had been rehearsing the motion his whole life. He remembered Marco standing beside him at his father's funeral in the rain, holding the umbrella over both of them, saying nothing, only there. No hand in this world had held his own hand through more darkness than the hand across the table from him now. The longer he listened, the more the pieces of the last 3 days seemed to arrange themselves gently, patiently, into a single shape. And that shape had Vivian's face. The voices that have stood beside a powerful man the longest are the ones he trusts without checking. That trust, in the end, is the most dangerous door left open inside his own house. 3 days after Marco set down that dinner table logic, Alessandro called for Vivian just after dawn. She came into the reading room in the same plain black sweater she had worn on the morning of the search. She had not slept properly in over a week. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were still. Alessandro stood at the tall window. He did not turn to look at her. He spoke to the glass. "The wedding is cancelled. You will remain in the estate, under supervision until the investigation concludes." The sentence was flat, dry as stone. He had rehearsed it in his own head for 2 days, and it still tore something loose in his chest to speak it aloud. Behind him, Vivian was silent for a long moment. He did not turn. When her voice came, it was very soft. "One day you will know I did not do this." He waited for the pleading. He had prepared himself for the pleading. He had told himself he would not soften if she wept, if she reached for his hand, if she called him by the name only she used. None of it came. "But you cannot trust me right now. I understand. You are a father before you are anything else. I would not want a man who was anything else." She turned. He heard her steps cross the reading room floor. He heard the door close behind her, quietly, without a slam. Only then did he close his eyes. By noon, Vivian had been moved to the smaller East reading room. A guard was placed at her door and told he would not be relieved for 8 hours. Another would replace him. There would be no gap. She was not permitted to leave the wing. Her meals would be brought up. Her phone had been taken from her before she stepped through the doorway. Her laptop had been sealed in a box. Word traveled through the estate the way word always travels in houses where 100 people work under the same roof. By the end of the day, every gardener, every guard, every maid knew. Their eyes changed. When Vivian walked from her door to the window, when she was seen through the crack of a passing hallway, the staff who had once bowed their heads politely to her now looked through her as if she were made of smoke. A few of them turned their faces away entirely. One of the younger maids crossed herself. None of them spoke to her. Only Sophia, when she brought up the evening tray, still lowered her head in the small, careful bow she had always given. She set the tray on the table. She did not meet Vivian's eyes, but she did not refuse them either. Then she left, quietly. That night, in the small staff sitting room, Lily asked her mother the same question she had already asked 4 times that day. "Mommy, is Aunt Vivian a bad person?" Sophia held her daughter's small head against her shoulder and did not answer, because she did not know how. In his own private study, behind a locked door, Alessandro sat at his desk with a plate of untouched dinner. On the corner of that desk stood a small silver frame, a photograph of himself and Vivian in a garden in Milan. 3 months earlier, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. He looked at it for a long time. He could not lift his fork. A father who loves a woman and loves a child does not get to keep both intact. He learns to pay the price with the parts of himself no one else can see. 4 nights after the birthday, Alessandro could not sleep. He had lain in his bed for 2 hours, staring at a ceiling he had stared at for years without ever having truly looked at. Somewhere just after 1 in the morning, he rose, pulled a robe over his shoulders, and walked barefoot down the darkened staircase to the kitchen for a glass of water. He did not turn on the light. That was how he almost missed her. Lily was sitting on the bottom step of the small back staircase that led up to the staff wing. Her small pink nightgown, too large for her feet not quite touching the floor. In her hand she held half a butter cookie. She was chewing it slowly, thoughtfully, the way small children eat when they are not really hungry. Alessandro stopped. She looked up at him with wide, dark eyes. She was not surprised. She was not afraid. She only looked at him the way she had looked at him on the marble floor of the grand hall. He walked over and sat down beside her on the low step. His knees rose almost to his chest. He set the glass of water down on the tile. For the first time in 7 days, his voice softened before he even knew he had chosen to soften it. "Little one, I want to ask you something again. That day, the person you saw by the cake, are you sure it was not Aunt Vivian?" Lily shook her head with the absolute conviction only a 3-year-old can carry. It was not Aunt Vivian. She wore a pink dress that day. He wore black clothes. It was a man. Alessandro paused. He asked the next question very gently, the way one asks a small child about a dream she had. "Did you see his face?" She shook her head. She had only seen him from behind, but then her small forehead furrowed, and she remembered something else. Her voice rose a little with pride at remembering it. On his hand he had a watch. The watch had gold on it, like a little crown, with a star. It was pretty. She drew the shape in the dark air between them with the small tip of her 3-year-old index finger. Alessandro did not move. He did not answer her. He sat on the bottom step of the back staircase in the dark of a house he had built to be safe, and he understood, in the space of one small drawing traced by a small hand, that he had been looking in the wrong direction for 7 days. A watch with a gold crown and a star on its face was not a common watch. It was not something a person bought in a shop. There was exactly one of that watch in the world, and he knew where it lived. He reached out slowly and stroked Lily's dark hair. He rose to his feet, but he did not walk back to his study. He stopped in the dark of the kitchen corridor and rested one hand flat against the wall. For the first time in 7 days, a new question began to form inside his head. If it was not Vivian, then everything he had believed for a week was pointing at someone else. Children see what grown men do not dare to see, not because their eyes are sharper, but because they have not yet learned how to turn away. Morning came at 7 the next day, pale and unremarkable, the way ordinary mornings arrive even in houses where nothing is ordinary anymore. Sophia was in the main hallway on the 2nd floor, adjusting the strap of Lily's small pink backpack. It was Tuesday. Preschool started at 8. Lily held her mother's hand and walked in careful, obedient steps beside her, humming a tune under her breath that no one had taught her. At the far end of the hallway, from the direction of Alessandro's study, Marco appeared. He was walking with the purpose of a man who had just finished a briefing. His jacket was buttoned. His shoulders were straight. As he walked, he lifted his left wrist and turned it slightly. pulling back the dark cuff of his suit sleeve to glance at the time, the familiar, unconscious gesture of a man whose hours were always spoken for. The white light from the tall corridor windows caught the face of the watch as his wrist moved. Lily stopped walking. She stopped so suddenly that Sophia's hand was pulled slightly backward before Sophia noticed. The little girl's dark eyes fixed on Marco's wrist, then her small mouth opened, and her voice rose in the bright, happy tone a child uses when she recognizes something she has seen before and is proud to have remembered it. "Mommy, that is the watch. The uncle in the kitchen on Ethan's birthday, he had that same one." The hallway went silent for 3 full seconds. Sophia's blood dropped so fast, she felt her fingers turn cold. She dropped to her knees at once, gathered Lily into her arms, and turned her face up toward Marco with an apology already spilling out of her. "I am so sorry, sir. She does not know what she is saying. She is only 3. She confuses things. Please forgive her, sir. Please." She pulled Lily to her feet and began walking her briskly toward the far staircase, whispering something urgent into the child's ear. Marco laughed. It was the practiced, easy laugh of a very confident man. "Children," he said, "they remember the shiny things. Do not worry, sister. It is nothing." He turned and walked in the opposite direction with the same unhurried stride he had come in with, but at the top landing of the upper staircase, standing very still in the shadow beside the tall potted fern, was Alessandro. He had come down to say good morning to Ethan before the boy left for school. He had heard every word. He did not move. The watch that Marco wore on his wrist, he knew that watch. He had commissioned it from a craftsman in Geneva. He had chosen the gold crown crossed with a star himself, from 3 sketches drawn on tracing paper. He had held it in his own hand for the entire flight home. There was exactly one of that watch in the world. On the inside of the back plate, engraved by that same craftsman's hand, was a single word: brother. He had placed it on Marco's wrist himself. On a Sunday evening 10 years and 1 month ago, he stood there until Marco was gone, until Sophia had led Lily out the front door, until the hallway held nothing but the soft sound of morning light hitting the walls. Then he turned, walked back into his study, and closed the door behind him with a hand so gentle that the latch made no sound at all when it caught. There is a moment when a man understands that the entire world he built has carried a crack he never once looked at. Alessandro did not confront Marco. He did not raise his voice at breakfast. He did not narrow his eyes across the study table. He did not once let the muscles of his face say what the inside of his chest had been screaming since the moment the hallway light had caught that small gold shape on a familiar wrist. The next morning, he sat down to breakfast with Marco exactly as he had done every morning for the last 10 years. He drank the coffee Marco had prepared. He asked after Marco's mother, who lived in a small house in Bay Ridge that Alessandro paid for. He listened to Marco's report on the household security schedule. He listened to Marco's update on the Vivian matter with the same attentive silence he had given the day before. When Marco leaned forward with his hands folded and said, in the careful tone of a brother offering hard counsel, "Brother, I think we need to make a final decision on the madam this week. It is not healthy for the house to keep her here in this state." Alessandro nodded slowly. "You are right. This week." Marco allowed himself a small, sad nod in return. He believed he had been heard. That evening at 9, 3 men entered the estate through the small service door in the east garden. The first was a former paratrooper named Enzo, who had once dragged Alessandro out of a burning storage building at the docks in the spring of 2015, when a device had detonated 3 seconds sooner than either of them expected. He had never asked to be repaid. The second was a soft-spoken Milanese man in his early 40s named Piero, an independent digital forensics specialist. Alessandro had hired him 3 months earlier through a channel Marco had never touched, for a job that had been quietly completed and never discussed again. The third was Signor Bertoli, the private accountant who had managed the Moretti family books since the years of Alessandro's father. He was 72, and his handshake still hurt. Alessandro received them in the private study. He did not offer them a drink. He did not sit. He spoke, standing. Reopen everything. The cake, the receipt, the kitchen footage, the statement of the kitchen assistant. Every witness who has said anything in this house since the birthday. I want their words re-examined. Piero nodded once. And on Marco Bellini, every transaction, every call log, every wire transfer that has passed through any account tied to him in the last 6 months, every phone he owns and every phone he might own that I do not know about. I want the personal bank accounts of the kitchen assistant, Paolo reviewed. Trace any deposit larger than a paycheck backward until you find the source. He paused. No paper leaves this room. No name is spoken outside this room. You report to me only. Through the channel we agreed on. Nothing goes through any household system. 3 heads inclined once. Nothing else needed to be said. They left the way they had come. Alessandro remained alone in the study for a long time after the door closed. Then he sat down at the walnut desk, opened the bottom drawer on the right side, and drew out a small, silver-framed photograph. It was the 2 of them on that Sunday evening 10 years ago, both younger, both laughing, Marco's wrist raised so the new watch caught the light. Alessandro looked at it for a long time. He was not angry. He was only tired. He placed the photograph face down in the drawer and slid it closed. Some men must learn to live with a truth that is walking toward them wearing the face of a brother. 4 days later, the first report reached Alessandro's desk. It arrived through the private channel just after 11 at night. Piero came in through the east service door alone. He set down a single black folder on the walnut desk, opened it, and spoke without sitting. The kitchen footage. 17 minutes were deleted from the cold room camera. Deletion timestamp. 4:41 in the afternoon on the day of the party. Only 3 accounts in this house have admin-level access to overwrite security footage. You are 1. The head of your security team is the 2nd. Marco Bellini is the 3rd. At 4:41, the hallway camera outside the server room recorded Marco entering. He was inside for 11 minutes. The times align exactly. Alessandro did not lift his eyes from the folder. Continue. We ordered a full reanalysis of the cake. The allergen was not present anywhere in the sponge that the madam prepared. It was concentrated entirely in the top layer of cream, the layer that was applied after the cake was finished, and placed inside the cold room. The pattern of dispersal shows the substance was introduced with a very small tool. Not a knife, not a spoon. Something the width of a fingertip or a thin swizzle stick. The madam did not use anything that small in her preparation. Rosa has confirmed. Piero turned the next page. The receipt found in the madam's vanity drawer. Prints on the edges match her fingers. The position of those prints is consistent with a customer accepting a receipt handed over a counter. However, on the upper right corner, we recovered a second print. It had been wiped. Not carefully enough. The residual ridge pattern is a partial, but the partial is a match to Marco Bellini's file in your household personnel records. Alessandro's hand rested flat on the surface of the desk. It did not move. The kitchen assistant, Paolo, 19 years old. 2 weeks before the party, a deposit of $42,000 entered his mother's medical account. The transfer was routed through 6 shell companies. Each layer was designed to look independent. It was not. The signatures of the 6th layer trace back to a holding entity that Marco Bellini used in the past. Signor Bertoli has confirmed the match against the family's own archives. He identified it within an hour. Piero paused, then added the last line quietly. The mother's illness is real. The boy is not evil. He is only frightened. Alessandro turned a page slowly, then another. The reports were dense, patient, meticulous. Every fabricated piece of evidence he had been handed over the last 2 weeks unmade itself in front of him. Every step of the case built against Vivian had a single set of fingerprints running underneath it. He did not speak for a long time. Finally, he looked up. Thank you, Piero. Leave the folder. Go home. Sleep. I will call you tomorrow. Piero bowed his head once and left as quietly as he had come. Alessandro sat alone in the study. Outside the tall window, the estate lay dark and silent. Somewhere on the upper floor, his son was sleeping. Somewhere in the east wing, a woman he had almost destroyed was reading by lamplight. The truth does not shout. The truth only stands very still in the room where it has always been, waiting for someone patient enough to finally turn and look at it. Alessandro understood all of it in a single night. He did not need Marco to explain. He did not need a confession. He did not need anyone to draw the shape on a piece of paper. He sat behind the walnut desk with the black folder still open in front of him, and he let the last 10 years walk quietly through his head. Vivian was a piece placed on a board, nothing more. She had been chosen for her position beside him. She had been chosen for the fact that everyone in this city already whispered about ambitious women who married powerful men. She had been chosen because she was the easiest lie to hand a father whose child had almost been killed. The receipt, the vanished footage, the frightened boy in the kitchen with the sick mother. Every single stone in the case against her had been placed by the same hand. That hand had put a small gold shape on Ethan's cake, and it wore a small gold shape of its own on its wrist. Alessandro also understood the reason. It arrived cleanly, the way the truth arrives when it stops hiding. Marco had spent his entire adulthood helping to build the Moretti empire. He had opened doors. He had taken bullets. He had signed his life away in a hospital ward on morphine and refused morphine so he could talk. And when it was finished, when the docks were quiet and the mayors returned the calls and the streets bent their heads to a single name, that name would still not be his. It would remain Alessandro's. And after Alessandro, it would pass to an 8-year-old boy who could not yet tie his own necktie. For Marco, the thought of one day standing behind a child on a throne he had built was intolerable. If Ethan had died from the slice of cake made by Vivian's own hands, everyone would have believed Vivian. Alessandro would have lost his son and the woman he loved in a single evening. The Moretti family, without an heir and with a broken head at its top, would have staggered. And Marco, the one remaining brother at the shattered man's side, would have moved, quietly, patiently, step by step, into the space of power under the banner of saving what was left. Alessandro did not slam the desk. He did not curse. He did not throw the wineglass across the study. He did not stand up at all. His anger was a different kind. It was the deep, slow, absolute anger of a man who has finally recognized the face of the thing he has been feeding at his own table for years. It did not rise inside him. It simply became part of him, part of his breath, part of the weight of his palms against the wood. He picked up the private line at 3 a.m. Enzo, Piero, and Signor Bertoli returned within the hour. He gave the order in a voice that never lifted. Prepare, but do not act until I give the word. Marco is under pressure. He knows something is wrong. He will move first. When he moves, we need to know exactly who inside this house he has bought. The only way to know that is to let him believe he is winning. 3 heads inclined. Before they left, he added one more sentence. And reopen every personnel file in this house for the last 6 months. I want to know who suddenly paid off a debt, who bought a new car, who has been sending unusual amounts home to family. No number is too small. True anger is always the quietest. It is most dangerous when it has learned how to wait. Exactly as Alessandro had predicted. 3 days later, at 4:30 p.m, Marco walked into the study with the professional strain of a man carrying news he did not want to be the one to carry. He closed the door behind him. He did not sit. Brother, intelligence has just come in. It is urgent. The Verona family is preparing to hit the North Warehouse tonight. Our largest shipment of the quarter is stored there. They have someone on the inside, I do not yet know who. If we lose that warehouse, we lose 5 million and our foothold on the East Pier. We cannot recover from that inside a fiscal year. You need to be there in person. No one else carries enough weight to shut this down before it starts. Alessandro kept his face still. He knew the shape of this bait the moment Marco spoke the first sentence. He also knew he had to swallow it clean, hook and line together, or Marco would smell the water. He allowed himself 2 seconds of considered silence. Then he nodded slowly. Fine. I will go. I will take half the security detail. You stay and hold the house. Ethan does not leave his room. Sophia and Lily will sleep in the small sitting room next to Ethan's as close as possible. The madam remains under supervision in the East reading room. Marco lowered his head in respectful acknowledgement. Yes, brother, for less than a heartbeat. Alessandro saw something flicker across Marco's eyes. A cold, satisfied flicker. Not triumph. Marco was too disciplined for triumph. Only the small, still light of a man who has waited a very long time for a door to open and has just heard the latch turn. In 10 years, Alessandro had never seen that light in Marco's face before. Marco turned and left. The moment the door closed, Alessandro pressed the private line. Enzo, Piero, and Signor Bertoli entered through the service door within 8 minutes. Alessandro stood at the tall window with his back to the room. He did not turn as he spoke. I leave at sunset with half the detail. I want it loud. Cars in the front drive. Radios on the household channel. Everyone in this house should see me go. Everyone in this house should hear where I am going. He turned. But you will place 20 additional men inside these walls before I leave. In the outer garage. In the rose garden. In the east cellar. On the roof of the glass conservatory. Not one of them wears a household uniform. Not one of Marco's 7 inner men learns of them. Not one word crosses any of our channels. Enzo nodded once. When Marco moves, you wait for the signal from me. 3 flashes of a torch across the 3rd floor window facing the drive. Not before, not one heartbeat before. Priority 1 is Ethan. Priority 2 is Sophia and Lily. Priority 3 is the madam. 3 heads inclined. Alessandro lowered his voice until it was quieter than the wind moving through the gap of the closed window. And gentlemen, if I do not come back tonight, you make certain Marco does not leave this house alive. This is not the order of a boss to his men. This is the last word of a father. Signor Bertoli, 72 years old, closed his eyes for a moment before nodding. At sunset, Alessandro left the estate with a loud convoy of black cars, heading north toward the warehouse district. In the back seat, he did not speak a single word the entire drive. The greatest hunter is the one who allows his prey to believe it is the one doing the hunting. Alessandro reached the north warehouse at 10 o'clock. The convoy pulled up along the wide loading dock. Alessandro stepped out. The wind carried the smell of the river and the low hum of shipping cranes half a mile away. His men fanned out in a loose perimeter, weapons ready, radios low. The warehouse was silent. No cars sat idling in the shadow of the fence line. No engines rumbled in the distance. No sign of Verona, no sign of anyone at all. Only the tall metal walls, the wet gleam of the pavement, and the quiet that answered every question before he had time to ask it. He stood there for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he turned to his driver. "Turn around. Now." The convoy was already reversing before the driver had finished nodding. In that same moment, at the Moretti estate, every light went out at once. The chandeliers in the main hall died. The soft wall sconces in the corridors died. The desk lamps in the offices died. Somewhere in a locked room on the ground floor, the security console cut to black. The camera feeds went with it. On the household radio channel, every voice in the estate suddenly heard only a thin, useless hiss. The automated gates locked in the closed position. The perimeter alarm did not sound. It could not sound. It had been silenced before the power was pulled. In the flash of that first moment of darkness, several people who had walked those hallways for years reached quietly into their jackets. A gardener whom Sophia had greeted every morning for the last 2 summers. 2 young security guards who had passed their background checks with the highest marks. A waiter who had served Ethan his birthday plate. A maintenance technician who had installed the estate's new server rack 3 months earlier. They drew their weapons. They moved into position in the drill they had rehearsed for weeks. On each of their upper arms, they tied a black band bearing the false insignia of the Verona family. If anyone survived tonight to speak of what they had seen, the story would enter the city as a revenge strike between 2 great houses, not as what it truly was. Marco wanted 3 things before sunrise. Ethan had to die, so that the original plan could still be completed. Lily had to die, because she was the only witness who could identify him by the watch. And Vivian had to die, so that the evidence already prepared against her would hold, and the world would still remember her as the woman who had reached for the child. On the 2nd floor, in the master bedroom of the estate heir, Ethan opened his eyes. Footsteps had passed his door, footsteps that did not belong to any of the men his father had told him about. He sat up slowly. His father had taught him, from the age of 5, that when something was wrong he was to hide in the tall wardrobe at the far end of his room and stay silent. But Ethan remembered Lily. She was sleeping in the small sitting room next to his own, with Sophia's blanket over her. She was 3 years old. She would not know to hide. He slid off the bed in his bare feet. He opened his door a crack, listened, and slipped into the hallway. He found her sitting up in the dark, her small stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, her wide eyes open. "Come with me, Lily. Fast." The 8-year-old took the 3-year-old by the hand and led her toward the west corridor, the corridor he knew because he had played hide-and-seek in it his entire life. Downstairs, in the laundry room, Sophia had heard nothing yet. The dark of a house always reveals its oldest traitors and its bravest hearts, and sometimes the bravest heart in the house is only 8 years old. In the east reading room, Vivian sat with a closed book on her lap when the lights went out. She did not move at first. She had lived in this house long enough to recognize the difference between an ordinary power failure and something else. Ordinary power failures did not silence the low, constant hum of the ventilation. Ordinary power failures did not stop the tiny green light on the corner smoke detector from blinking. Somewhere beyond the door, she heard the soft mechanical click of every lock in the wing releasing at once. The system had been designed that way. Any total loss of power was to unlock every internal door in the estate in case of fire, so that no person would ever burn behind a sealed door in this house. Her own door swung 1/4 of an inch inward. She heard her guard's footsteps break into a run and disappear down the corridor toward some distant noise. Vivian stepped out. The hallway was black. She could see well enough to trace the wall with one hand, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the door. This was every door she had wanted for 2 weeks. She could take the servants' stairwell down, cross the rose garden, slip through the side gate, and be out of the estate that had condemned her before anyone realized she was gone. In this chaos, no one would even look for her until morning. No one would blame her for leaving. No one who mattered was left to blame her. She began to walk toward the side stairwell. Then, in the west hallway, she heard 2 small voices whispering in a rush. "Ethan, Lily." She stopped where she was. She could just make out their two small silhouettes pressed flat against the wall. Ethan had his arm across Lily's chest, holding her back. At the far end of the hallway, a taller shadow moved along the corridor with the deliberate walk of a man searching room to room. Vivian stood in the dark of her open doorway. She thought of Alessandro's face when he had said the words, "The wedding is cancelled." She thought of the eyes of every maid who had walked past her for the last 2 weeks, as if she were nothing but smoke. She had every reason to keep walking. She turned back. She crossed the dark hallway in 5 soundless steps, dropped to a crouch behind the children, and pressed a finger to her lips. "Follow me." Alessandro had once shown her, in the 3rd month of their engagement, a small safe room hidden in the northwest corner of the estate behind a false wall in the library. Only he, she, and 3 of his most trusted men knew of it. He had walked her through the tapping code himself. She led the 2 children through the black corridors, avoiding the sweep of the searching footsteps, taking corners she remembered by touch alone. She reached the library. She tapped the wall. The false panel opened. She lifted Lily inside. She guided Ethan in with a hand on his back. Inside the small room, bottled water, a flashlight, a folded blanket, and a short-range radio set to a private frequency. She kissed the crown of Ethan's head. She squeezed Lily's small hand. "I will come back. Do not open this for anyone, no matter what name they call. Only for Papa Alessandro." She closed the panel from the outside. Then she walked back down the corridor. She stopped beside a heavy chair. She kicked it hard onto its side. The crash rang out into the dark like a struck bell. Footsteps changed direction and began to run. She turned and ran into the darkness of the main hall. Love is not measured in words. It is measured in the moment it chooses to stay, even when staying means dying. Alessandro drove the return road at a speed that pressed his men into their seats. He lifted the private line and spoke one word. "Begin." From the shadows around the estate, 20 men rose out of hiding places no household map had ever recorded. He entered through the small side gate behind the kitchen garden, a walkway Marco had never once been shown in 10 years. He moved through the dark of the servants' corridor and found Sophia in the laundry room, pressed against the wall, her hands trembling as she looked toward every sound. "Come with me." 2 of his loyal men fell in behind them. They took the hidden hallway to the library. Alessandro tapped the false wall. 3 slow, 2 fast. The panel opened. Ethan and Lily were sitting on the floor with their arms around each other, the small stuffed rabbit between them. Both of them looked up, and for one long second, no one breathed. Then the children lunged forward, Ethan into his father's arms, Lily into Sophia's. Ethan did not cry. He lifted his face against his father's shoulder. "Papa, Aunt Vivian brought us in here." Lily nodded firmly against her mother's neck. Aunt Vivian ran outside. She let the bad uncles chase her so we could be safe. Every last doubt inside Alessandro shattered like glass. He handed the 3 of them to the 2 men beside him with a look that carried its own instructions. Then he drew his weapon and walked back into the dark. The final confrontation drew him back to the same grand hall where the birthday had been held. The long table stood bare. The marble floor caught the red pulse of the emergency lights along the walls. He found Vivian there. She had been recaptured. Her shoulder was dark with blood, but she was breathing. She stood beside Marco. Marco held a weapon at her back. Around them stood 7 of his most trusted men. Marco saw Alessandro and let the mask of 10 years fall from his face. "Yes, brother, it was me, the cake, the camera, the receipt, the kitchen boy, all of it. She was never a partner, only the one I chose to carry the blame. Do you know how many years I stood behind you while you took credit for what we built together? How many nights I smiled while you called me your brother? Now all of it is to pass to a boy of 8. No, not tonight." He lifted his weapon toward Alessandro and gestured to his men. Nothing happened. Every door around the grand hall opened. Alessandro's loyal men stepped into the light from every corridor. 3 of the 7 Marco most trusted slowly turned their guns toward Marco. Alessandro had known exactly who was still loyal, who had been bought, and who had pretended to be bought, so they could carry every whispered plan back to him. The coup collapsed in less than 30 seconds without a single shot. Marco went to his knees. His weapon rang against the marble floor. Alessandro walked to him. He did not speak. He lowered himself, took Marco's left wrist in one hand, and unclasped the watch. 10 years of a symbol. The little gold shape that a 3-year-old had remembered and returned to him as the truth. He closed his fingers around it and gestured for Marco to be taken. Every symbol of loyalty has 2 faces. The true face only shows itself when the false face is torn away. A few weeks passed. The investigation into everything Marco had built came apart in the daylight, the way lies always do when a patient hand pulls at their edges. Every fabricated piece against Vivian was returned to what it truly had been. Her name was cleared inside the family, inside the household, and inside every corner of the city where a whisper had begun to travel. One quiet morning, Alessandro walked into the reading room, where she was reading by the window. He stood in front of her for a very long time before he spoke. "I was wrong. I let a case that was placed in front of me lead me to doubt the woman I was going to marry. No apology is enough, but I still want to say it." Vivian looked up at him. Her eyes held no tears, but no smile yet either. "You do not owe me an apology for protecting your son. Any father would have done the same, but trust is not something a single apology returns. It needs time. I need time." Alessandro nodded. He did not press her. He respected the answer the way it deserved to be respected. Sophia and Lily continued to live in the estate. They were no longer the housekeeper and her small daughter in the way they had been before. Alessandro gave them their own room in the main wing of the house. Ethan and Lily became closer than any brother and sister born of the same blood, the 8-year-old boy carrying the 3-year-old girl on his back through the garden, tying her shoes without being asked, saving her the larger half of every cookie. Some weeks later, Alessandro arranged a second birthday for his son. There were no hundreds of guests this time. There were no chandeliers. There were no violins. Only the back garden, a round table under the trees, and the people who truly mattered: Sophia, Lily, Dr. Reyes, 2 of the loyal men, and Vivian. She had come, though she sat at the farthest corner of the table. But she had come. A small cream cake was placed at the center. Ethan reached toward the first slice. Lily looked up at Alessandro with the most serious expression a 3-year-old face can hold. "Uncle, did you check the cake?" Alessandro looked at her for a few seconds. Then he smiled the rare, quiet smile almost no one in this world had ever been allowed to see, and knelt down until his eyes were level with hers. 3 times, little one. Only then did Lily nod and let Ethan take his slice. Watching the 2 children laugh in the light of the garden, Alessandro understood at last. The Moretti Empire had not been saved by money, nor by power, nor by the many layers of guards around these marble walls. It had been saved by a 3-year-old girl who saw a small detail that every grown adult in the room had missed, and who was brave enough to speak. Dear friends, thank you for staying with this story all the way to its end. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one holding the whole truth in its hands. The world teaches grown men to trust the loudest reports, the heaviest evidence, the most confident faces. But truth does not always arrive dressed in authority. Sometimes it arrives in the whisper of a child who has not yet learned to doubt her own eyes. And loyalty, real loyalty, is not measured by the years a man stands beside you. It is measured by the moment he chooses to stay, when everything he could gain lies on the other side of the door. We would love to hear from you. Has there ever been a moment in your own life when a small voice tried to tell you something, and you almost did not listen? A child, a friend, a quiet person no one thought was important but whose few words turned out to hold everything. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every word you send us, and we treasure the honest feelings you trust us with. If this story touched something inside your heart tonight, please take a moment to leave a like on this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please consider doing so. Every like, every share, and every new subscriber helps us bring you more heartfelt stories like this one every single day. Wishing you and everyone you love good health, peaceful days, and a life full of gentle people who choose to stay beside you when it matters most. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you again in the next story.